I am Joe, commonly known as Eyob, depends on the day, but I'm a recovering codependent, excitaholic, and had a history of pretty bad drug abuse that God totally and completely healed me from, which is incredible. Every day I think of that and I go, wow, 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 wow. How is that possible? But as we know, the drugs are not the problem. And I think for me, part of this talk is really about this journey that when I was this drug addict in Toronto and literally, just steps away from being homeless, like just literally, you know, just steps away. Um, and to the point where I'm completely and utterly trapped in this life that I can't get out of. And what was weird about my story is the fact that I knew God. I had a relationship with Jesus. So it's very difficult for people to understand how is that possible? How can one have a relationship with Jesus and be addicted? These two things should, should not be able to go together. But the realization was that I had a relationship with God, but my relationship with God was more intellectual. So I knew God intellectually. I studied about God, but I didn't really know the depths of that relationship. And what I want to share with you guys today is really about that. It's actually from a passage in Luke 5, which I was just kind of meditating on and really hit me in a new way in relationship to recovery, and that there is levels to recovery and there's deeper places that God wants to call us into. And the story is pretty simple. It's a story about the call of the first disciples of Jesus. And the story is essentially, these guys have been fishing all night, had caught nothing. And so they were just sitting around mending their nets. In some ways, they were kind of sulking. Imagine this is your livelihood. This is how you made all your money. And you fished all night. You're a professional fisherman. Your job is to catch fish and did not catch one. So this is how they fed their families. And so they're just sitting around mending their nets, fixing their nets essentially. And Jesus shows up out of the blue and he decides to use the boat. He asks to use if they can, use their boat. And he's in the boat and he's preaching. So this is kind of Jesus's, kind of first sermon, and he's going about it. And after he finishes the sermon, he looks at Peter and he says, "Hey, Peter, why don't you go out into the deep for a catch?" And of course, Peter is like, "Master, like we've been fishing all night." Literally, he says, "We've toiled all night." Imagine the struggle that they've been in. All night, we caught nothing. But at your word, we will go for a catch. And what I find profound about that first part essentially is that in my relationship with God, I did let kind of Jesus into my boat or into my life. I remember as a young little kid, 10-year-old in Brockville in Camp, Iowa, I made this confession with my mouth that Jesus is Lord because I was terrified of the idea of going to hell. I still remember this dude, I don't know if he was American or whatever, but he preached fire and brimstone. And I was so terrified of going to hell that I literally ran to the front of all the little kids and made that confession. And so from that day forward, I was in relationship with God. But I really didn't understand what I had said yes to. Like I intellectually knew it, but it didn't necessarily change my behavior. I still continued being the same guy. And so for me, the question for all of us is that most people will be like, yeah, but I have Jesus in the boat. Yeah, that's cool. That's just the beginning. of the relationship. That's what I realized. It's like when you confess with your mouth that Jesus Christ is Lord, that's just the beginning. That's just the entry point. So so from there, this is Jesus. Once he gets into your life, he just wants more. Like he just, it's part of the journey of healing and recovery. So what does he do? He's like, okay, guys, now that I'm in your boat, how about take you out a little deeper? Just imagine that right now. Like you're Peter, and you're like, what? So here's what I'm learning is that recovery is one of the most challenging journeys we can all take. And it forces us to confront our deepest fears, past failures, and the lies we've told ourselves to survive. Because for Peter, he could have just stood there and come up with whatever reason that he had. And he did. He's like, dude, like we tried this already. It didn't work. But he had enough wisdom, I don't know where it came from, to recognize that he was talking to somebody different, that the invitation was coming from somebody who knew something he didn't know. Because he says, at your word. That's all he did was he just got a word. And I thought, wow, what is so profound? So for me, what I'm learning in this season is that this is a season of tension between two competing desires, okay? There's this pull to stay in the shallow waters where I'm comfortable, where I'm known, where it feels safe. And at the same time, there's a call to go into the deep, where there's real transformation. But I've never been there. I don't know what it looks like. It's scary. But that's the invitation I'm feeling in this season. And it's funny enough because I've experienced that same invitation when I was, addicted to drugs in Toronto, overdosed in 1999, and coming to Ottawa back home after 5 years. I felt like the prodigal son who just literally, wasted his entire inheritance after going to Bible school and all the guilt and the shame. I've told that story. But that was scary to come back home. But that was the invitation for transformation. And that changed my life because that season, I began to walk out what it really truly meant to the level that I was at, to have a relationship with God. And through that process, God completely delivered me from the drugs, like totally gone. Like it was a miracle. It took a while, but it did. But that became familiar after a while. I was hanging out, doing all the religious things. I was at the Metropolitan Bible Church. I became a leader. I started doing all this amazing stuff with outreach, and I was helping out with the homeless, serving. And before you know it, I'm in a leadership role, and I'm part of the young adult leadership role. Now it's like, it's familiar. I'm no longer really, quote unquote, working my recovery. I'm kind of coasting because John and I were just talking about this earlier, where ministry becomes the cover. That becomes my identity. And so now everybody's like, look at this guy. I'm literally the poster child at the Met of like, look what God can do. And I'm getting all these amazing opportunities. And through that process, of course, I became a pastor. So what happened was that became familiar. It became predictable. And this is where new habits started to form. New relationships and patterns that I thought were all gone, but were still there. Getting into codependent relationship with girlfriends. Getting into porn to self-medicate. All of a sudden, it was just like, they just started to fester in some ways. And so through that process, again, God is like, hey, there's an invitation to go deeper in this area. So I remember, I still have my journals about this addiction with porn. It's like, what the heck? Like, you delivered me from drugs. Now I can't. Like, what the heck's going on? And I would come to God over and over again and ask for healing and deliverance. And I don't know how it happened. I just know that I just kept coming to God. And one day he took away the desire. It was gone. Like, it was gone. It was like, what in the world has happened? The thing that I used to struggle so much in, he took me deeper. It was an invitation to go deeper and deeper. And the deep for all of us is terrifying. Because why is it? It's unknown, it's uncharted, and it's unpredictable. We're not in control. Yet what I'm learning, it's the place we must go if we're really going to truly heal, grow, and experience the fullness of life that God has for us. We can all have a measure of recovery. And we can settle so easily for that. And it's easy because it's like, well, now my life is manageable. But the question is it fully given over to God? Or are we still managing parts and pieces? Are we still in delusion? Are we still lying to ourselves? And that's the thing about Peter. Like, Peter was a professional fisherman. Like, I mean, he knows what he's doing. But then Jesus comes along and he's like, no, I want you to go even deeper. His logic is like, no, this doesn't make sense. And this is what I'm in this season. It's like, God, like, this doesn't make sense. Logically, it doesn't make sense. I have 3 kids. I have this. I have all the excuses for the season that I'm in relationship to what God's calling me to, because I'm terrified. Let's just be honest. Because I have to get even more honest. And what I'm learning in this season is we have to allow God to expose us. Like, being exposed is not a bad thing to our fears. And being really honest and saying, I don't know, I'm scared. And for all of us, there's things that have worked in the past that are not going to work in this new season. Because if you go back to a previous season, all you're doing is perpetuating the same pattern. So what makes you think, in this the thing about toiling, like so many, and I realizing that, like, recovery doesn't mean toil. Like, God doesn't want us to toil. And for most of us, that's our relationship with God. It's like, it's this toiling that's happening and we're exhausted just working. And that's not the point of recovery. There's something profound in recovery. So when Peter, I'm sure, confronted his doubts and his weakness and in past failures, and to just say, okay, I'm going to try again. I'm at your word, I'm going to go out to the deep. And I said, and I don't know if it's true, but I think Peter was a reluctant obedient. It's my own words. There's 2 things that were happening. The rational side in his brain told him this wasn't going to work, but it was Jesus that was saying go. So he was like, you know what? And I think that I'm going to say yes. So this idea that we're going to have like absolute clarity, and no, it's always going to be a tension. There's always going to be the logical side of our brain that's going to say this is not going to work. Doing it God's way is not going to work. It just makes no sense. I'm sure, I don't know. Peter might have been tired. He might not have been ready, but he obeyed. And guess what? When he launched out into the deep, he experienced the biggest catch of his life. And now, interesting. And I really believe recovery is about launching out into the deep. When we really just abandon it all and we just say, okay, I'm going to do it your way because my way hasn't worked. It's got me a measure, but you're asking me to go to a place I've never been before. I'm going to go for it. And he does. And he has such a big catch. It says that their boat began to sink. So they had to call on the other boats. So now they've got so much fish that their buddies have to come and help them. And that's a profound picture, an image of the blessings of God. It talks about that in the big book. When we fully begin the process of, especially once we start entering step 5, we start to experience the blessings of God. And there's these promises of God that are so profound and so powerful. And I believe that is really what recovery is. Here's what I picture the shallow waters represent. They represent the patterns and habits we've clung to for comfort, even when they hurt us. They're the lies we tell ourselves to stay where we are. And I've heard it all. This is just who I am. This is how I always will be. This is who I am. It's too late for me to change. I've tried everything and nothing seems to work. These are just stories that we're telling ourselves so we can stay in the shallow water, so that we can stay comfortable, because we're just terrified. Instead of being honest and saying, I'm totally and utterly terrified, that's what Peter's saying. He's like, okay, but you said it because you said I'm going to do it. And he confronted these fears and failures and past traumas that, some of us we've buried. And let's be honest, this is not an easy ask. Jesus wasn't making a simple ask. I think we often think like he's saying, forget everything that you know, all your programming, and just follow my word. What does that mean? It means that following his word or going on to the deep means we have to step into places we avoided for years, people we've avoided for years. It means facing the pain, surrendering control, and trusting God when everything in us screams no. That is when you know, by the way, God is at work. When everything in your body is like, go the other way, turn around. That's the sign that you're on a really good path, that you're walking a path of faith. So what are the promises of the deep? I believe this is the promise that Jesus will meet us there. Do you notice the very place that was Peter's struggle became the place of his greatest win or catch? It's profound. But here's the whole thing. This is Jesus. You think like Peter's gone deep enough now. It's like, okay, cool. Look at that, God. I just got blessed like nobody's business. Not only did I get blessed, but everybody else is getting blessed. Like that's how we traditionally would end the story. Like, hey, let's celebrate. But no, not with Jesus. Jesus is like, there's another invitation. The invitation is, he says, Peter, you think this is cool, but I'm going to make you into a fisher of men. So now he's asking him even deeper. Now to even a deeper call. Imagine this. You just won, you just had the biggest financial windfall. Like your business just got blessed. And Jesus is like, oh, by the way, I have something else for you. There's another step of faith. And Peter, in that moment, this is when you know his recovery is next level. Like something's happened, because there's no like, oh, at your word. And he literally, it says they left everything behind and followed him. They didn't even bother. They just followed him. Why is that? Why is it after a miraculous catch, Peter and the disciples just made a choice to leave it all? Why did they walk away from all of it? The nets, the fish, the success. I'm sure they'd be like the coolest guys. They could have leveraged that because I believe they realized the catch wasn't the point. It's never the point. We always make it about the point. The point is the invitation. Jesus wasn't just calling them to fish. He was calling them to something deeper, a life of purpose, freedom, and transformation. And with Jesus, that's the point. That's why following Jesus is such a quote unquote dangerous thing, because he's always inviting us into a deeper transformation. And every time there is a call for transformation, it's going to cost us. It's going to cost us what we know to be true, what we think is, the truth, because our tendency is that we want to build monuments and idols out of them. And we want to keep, telling that story. But Jesus is a God of new beginnings. Every day that we wake up, there's a new beginning. It's a new invitation to go deeper with him. And for most of us, it's like we can just be in the shallow waters and dilute ourselves with these stories and lies to say, I've gone far enough. And there's no condemnation, by the way. There's no like, hey, cool, you're in the water at least, which is a pretty cool thing. But there's so much more in recovery. And the end goal, John talks about this idea of recovering this relationship we had with God in the garden, this intimacy. It's a deeper and deeper place, but there's a shedding that happens every time. So there's an invitation for all of us. Is it to continually going back to the person you were before the struggle because you're just addicted to that guy? No, I think it's about becoming the person God always intended us to be. So my question to you guys is a few questions. Hey, what is God calling you to launch into right now in this season of recovery? What is your recovery? What is God really? And what are you terrified about? Like, what is the fear that's keeping you in the shallow waters? Like, I know exactly what's keeping me in the shallow waters. My fear is that lose control, because for me, control's everything. As a codependent, you want to control everything. You always want to play God. You mask it beautifully with all the beautiful ornaments of spirituality, but never fully going out into the deep, never fully just abandon it all, because you're afraid that if you do that, you will be abandoned. That God's not going to be there for you. So you're like, I'm just going to hold on to the little that I have. Because you just don't know. I know this. I'm not saying this somehow as someone who's graduated from this. The deep is scary. It does force us to confront what's broken and to trust God. And it feels impossible at times. And because you can't do it on your own. You have to experience the goodness and kindness of God like Peter did. Because when Peter saw the catch, do you know what he says that is so profound? I'll just read it because I want to make sure I say it beautifully. But he says, when they had done so, they caught such a large number of fish that their nets began to break. So they signaled their partners in the other boat to come and help them. And they came and filled both boats so full that they began to sink. This is cool. When Simon Peter saw this, he fell at Jesus' knees and said, "Go away from me, Lord. I am a sinful man." For he and his companions were astonished at the catch they had taken. So he came to this realization. He was confronted with his sin because he saw the goodness of God. It is his kindness that leads us to repentance. He experienced the kindness of God to a measure. That's what it was. It was such an over the top thing to happen to experience the blessing of God that he was in awe, that he fell to his knees. He didn't even care about the fish anymore. He didn't even care about the nets. He just realized he was in front of somebody that had completely and utterly shattered his whole paradigm and perspective. And that's all he wanted was Christ. And I think unless you have that, it's going to be really difficult to go into the deep. It's impossible. It's hard for us to leave everything because we have to get to a place of trust. And that's what happened here is that the sign and wonder that they experienced was just that, a sign and a wonder to show them that this is a God who can care for them. And so that stuff didn't matter. And so that's kind of my share. Like, I didn't want to go too deep into it, but really at the end of the day, I think this is what God is asking us. I believe 2025 is the year for the deep. I believe every one of us has an opportunity in 2025 to step into the deep, to go to places we've never been, so that we can experience lives we've never had. And I believe that's the journey of recovery, is that God wants to give us more and more of that amazing life that he calls abundant.